20 of the finest doctors in the world stood surrounding his hospital bed, and still he was slipping away. The billionaire who once commanded boardrooms, who built empires with his voice alone, now lay helpless, his breathing shallow, his body failing him. Monitors beeped frantically, white coats whispered in panic, and still, nothing was working. And as the world's most powerful men and women flew in to pray at his bedside, it was a black housekeeper, quietly sweeping in the corner, who saw what none of them could. What she noticed would change everything. That's how it began. A story not of money or medicine, but of dignity, courage, and the eyes that see truth when others are blind. His name was Charles Alden, a man whose wealth could build skyscrapers overnight, who owned private jets, who politicians called a friend and enemies called untouchable. But money cannot buy time, and as the illness ate away at his body, he realized just how fragile he truly was. His children gathered, his lawyers hovered, and his doctors, 20 of the most expensive specialists flown in from Europe, Asia, and America, argued endlessly about diagnoses. Some said his heart. Others swore it was his lungs. The team from Switzerland insisted it was neurological. But as days turned into weeks, Charles faded, and his empire trembled in silence. The hospital itself had been transformed into a fortress. Security stood at every corner. Journalists begged for updates. And every hallway smelled of sterile desperation. Nurses moved briskly, but beneath their professionalism, fear lingered. Everyone knew the weight of who lay in that bed. To lose him was not just to lose a man, but to disrupt entire industries. The world outside whispered that his billions should buy him life. And yet inside those white walls, it seemed that money had met its match. In the midst of all this power and panic was Evelyn. She was not a doctor, not a nurse, not a family member. She was the housekeeper assigned to the billionaire's private suite. Her uniform was pressed, her movements quiet, her presence almost invisible. But Evelyn carried something far greater than a title. She carried dignity, a quiet strength born of years of being overlooked. She had raised children on wages that others dismissed as crumbs. She had endured supervisors who pretended not to hear her ideas, guests who barely glanced at her face. But through it all, she had learned to see what others missed. Every stain, every wrinkle, every small detail that could shift an entire room, her eyes were trained for it. And on this night, when doctors argued and family wept, her eyes would catch the truth. She had grown used to silence, moving with her mop and cloth, blending into the background. But as she watched Charles struggle for breath, something in her heart stirred. His hand twitched unnaturally. His lips paled in a way she had seen before, not in hospitals, but in homes she had cleaned in her neighborhood. She remembered once tending to an old neighbor, a man without riches, whose life nearly ended not from illness but from a mistake, something small, something overlooked. And as she glanced at the billionaire's bedside, she noticed the tube inserted at his arm, something about its angle, the swelling near the site, the discoloration that crept up his skin. It was wrong, deeply wrong. She froze, cloth in hand, heart racing. Could it be? Could the richest man in the world be dying not from disease, but from an error none of these brilliant doctors had seen? She wanted to speak, but her throat closed. Who was she? Just a housekeeper. What weight did her voice carry against 20 white coats with endless degrees? If she was wrong, they would laugh, or worse, dismiss her entirely. And yet, if she was right, every second she stayed silent was a step closer to his death. She leaned on her mop handle, staring at the sight, praying for courage. The monitors screamed louder. The doctors barked at each other, and still, no one looked at the arm that Evelyn could not unsee. Charles's daughter wept in the corner, clutching her pearls, whispering about her father's will. His son scrolled through his phone, perhaps already thinking about the empire he might inherit. Lawyers discussed succession quietly in the hallway, but Evelyn stood frozen, her conscience heavy. She thought of her own son, of the times she had told him, "Never let anyone silence you when you know the truth." She thought of her grandmother, who had once worked as a maid for a family who never said thank you, who told Evelyn, "We may scrub their floors, but God gave us eyes too. Don't forget that." And in that moment, Evelyn's choice became clear. She had to speak. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady but soft. "Excuse me," she said. No one turned. The chaos drowned her out. She stepped closer. "Excuse me, doctors." Heads whipped toward her, irritated, surprised. A nurse frowned, about to hush her, but Evelyn pointed, her hand trembling. "Look at his arm. The swelling. The tube, it's not right. Silence fell for a second, a strange, thick silence where pride met truth. One of the doctors scoffed, waving her off. But another younger one, curious, leaned in. His eyes widened. "Wait," he murmured. He pushed the billionaire's sleeve higher. Gasps echoed. The skin was purple, the vein inflamed. The line was misplaced, leaking medication into his tissue instead of his bloodstream. The billionaire had been slowly poisoned by the very treatment meant to save him. The room erupted. Doctors scrambled, nurses rushed, alarms blared louder. Orders flew in every direction, and for the first time in days, there was a breakthrough. The swelling was treated, the line corrected, the medications flushed properly. The billionaire's breathing steadied, color slowly returning to his lips. The crisis was not over, but death had been pushed back. All because a black housekeeper had dared to speak, where 20 doctors failed to see. Evelyn stepped back, her heart pounding, sweat gathering at her brow. No one thanked her at first. No one even looked her way. They were too busy saving the man. But in her chest, pride burned quietly. She had not been silenced. She had not been invisible. She had spoken truth, and it had mattered. For the first time in weeks, the room carried hope. The billionaire's chest rose with steadier breaths, his monitors calmed to a rhythm that suggested life, not loss. Yet amid the storm of medical jargon and hurried adjustments, Evelyn stood quietly at the edge of the room, as though she were nothing more than a shadow cast against the fluorescent light. She had spoken, she had saved a man's life, and still she remained unseen. When the immediate crisis passed, the doctors regrouped. Some congratulated each other, as though the discovery had been their own, nodding gravely as if they had collectively noticed the error. Others scribbled notes furiously, their pride wounded that such a mistake could have slipped through their ranks. The chief physician, a man with years of accolades, glanced at Evelyn once, only briefly, and then looked away. His silence said everything. There was no place in their world for a housekeeper's heroism. But Charles's daughter had noticed. Her mascara had run from hours of tears, her voice hoarse from begging her father to live. She approached Evelyn hesitantly, her designer heels tapping softly on the polished floor. Did you see that before them?" she whispered, almost incredulous. Evelyn lowered her gaze. "I only spoke what I saw, ma'am." The daughter blinked, studying her, as if trying to reconcile how someone in uniform, carrying cleaning supplies, could possibly have outdone the 20 minds paid fortunes to save her father. Yet it was the son, Michael, who reacted with venom. He stormed across the room, his face flushed with the arrogance of entitlement. "Do you understand what you've done?" he snapped, his words laced with disdain. Speaking out of turn, interrupting doctors, "It could have cost my father his life if you were wrong. Do you think this is some game? You're here to clean, not to interfere." His voice rose, sharp enough to draw glances from the medical team. Some nodded subtly, agreeing. Others remained silent, too fearful to contradict him. Evelyn's chest tightened. The weight of centuries pressed against her shoulders in that moment. The reminder that no matter how vital her truth, her role in their eyes would always be servitude, silence, obedience. She wanted to retreat, to shrink back into invisibility, but something steadier held her in place. Dignity. She raised her eyes, met Michael's glare, and answered with calm resolve. "Sir, if I had stayed silent, your father would not be breathing right now." The words hung in the air like thunder. For a moment, no one spoke. The billionaire stirred faintly on the bed, his lips parting, a raspy whisper escaping, too faint to understand, but enough to remind them all of what was truly at stake. The chief physician cleared his throat, trying to redirect the conversation. "Let us focus on stabilizing Mr. Alden. We will review all procedures later." It was his way of brushing Evelyn aside, of protecting the sanctity of their reputations. But the truth had already pierced through the sterile veil. Everyone in that room knew. The housekeeper had seen what they had not. In the hallway, gossip spread quickly. Nurses whispered in astonishment. Some praising Evelyn's courage, others warning each other not to mention it aloud. It could cost her job, one muttered. Doctors don't like being embarrassed. Security guards exchanged knowing looks. Even they had felt the shift in power when Evelyn had spoken. The hierarchy of the hospital had been rattled, and for many, that was more unsettling than the billionaire's condition itself. Evelyn returned to her cart, her hands trembling as she wiped an already spotless counter. She could still feel Michael's words stinging her skin. Yet she also remembered the billionaire's daughter's eyes that, for the first time, had looked at her not as invisible labor, but as someone capable of holding life in her hands. That night, as she prepared to leave, she passed through the staff entrance where other housekeepers gathered. One of them, a younger woman named Rosa, grabbed her hand. "We heard what happened," she whispered, awe flickering in her tone. "They say you saved him. Is it true?" Evelyn hesitated, then nodded slightly. Rosa's eyes filled with pride. "You showed them?" "You showed all of them we're not blind. We're not nothing." Others nodded quietly, offering small smiles of solidarity. For the first time, Evelyn felt seen, not by the doctors, not by the family, but by the people who understood what it meant to be invisible every day. Meanwhile, inside the lavish suite, Charles Alden drifted between consciousness and dream. His body was frail, his mind foggy, but fragments of reality pierced through. He remembered the voices, the panic, the suffocating weight of death pulling him under. And he remembered, faintly, a softer voice breaking through the noise. A woman's voice. He could not place her face, but the words had cut through his despair like a thread of light. Over the next few days, his condition improved slowly. The corrected treatment allowed his body to regain strength. Though he remained fragile, his empire still hanging by a thread, the doctors continued their work, this time more careful, their pride subdued by the unspoken truth of their failure. But Evelyn knew the silence was temporary. At any moment, she could be punished for daring to cross the invisible line, drawn between her station and theirs. Her fears proved right when, 3 days later, she was summoned to the hospital's administrative office. The director sat stiffly behind a mahogany desk, his expression cold. "Evelyn," he began, his tone dripping with rehearsed formality, "we've received complaints regarding your conduct during Mr. Alden's treatment." She swallowed hard, bracing herself. "You spoke out of turn in front of specialists. While your intentions may have been good, such actions can undermine medical authority. Undermine authority." The words burned into her chest. She wanted to shout, to remind him that those same authorities had nearly killed the man. Instead, she steadied her voice. "Sir, if I hadn't spoken, Mr. Alden might not be alive today." The director's jaw tightened. "Be that as it may, rules exist for a reason. You are employed here as housekeeping staff, not medical personnel. Do you understand?" She nodded slowly, holding back tears. It was not understanding he demanded, but submission. Yet even as he spoke, Evelyn realized something. Her truth had already left the confines of that office. The daughter had seen. The staff had whispered. The truth was alive, and it could not be silenced forever. That evening, as she walked past the billionaire's suite, she noticed the door slightly open. Inside, Charles lay awake, his eyes clearer now. He turned his head slowly, catching sight of her. His lips parted, and though his voice was weak, his words were deliberate.
"You saved me!"
Evelyn froze, stunned. For the first time, recognition had come not from whispers, not from those in shadows, but from the man whose life she had preserved. His daughter, sitting at his bedside, nodded tearfully. "She did, Daddy, she did." And for the first time in her life, Evelyn felt the walls of invisibility begin to crack. The words hung in the air like a benediction. "You saved me." They carried more weight than the billions tied to Charles Alden's name. For Evelyn, it was the first time her existence, her labor, her watchful eyes had been seen not as background noise, but as vital, as human. The daughter reached for her father's hand, nodding, tears slipping down her cheeks. "It was her, Daddy." When the doctors missed it, she spoke. Charles's lips curved into the faintest smile. His voice, though raspy, carried authority. "Bring her closer." Evelyn hesitated. She had never been invited near his bed except to change sheets, to polish tables, to erase fingerprints from glass. Now every step forward felt surreal, like walking into a place she did not belong. But when she stood beside him, his hand, weak, trembling, reached out and brushed her wrist. "You looked," he whispered, "when no one else did." The doctors stiffened at the edges of the room. Some averted their eyes. Others bristled at the acknowledgement. Pride wounded deeper than any scalpel could cut. Michael, the son, clenched his jaw, his fists curling at his sides. But the daughter, her expression softened by gratitude, leaned forward. "Father, if it weren't for her, you'd be gone." A silence settled, thicker than before. For the first time, it was not Evelyn who felt small, but the doctors who felt diminished. Their titles, their white coats, their years of accolades could not erase the fact that 20 of them had overlooked what a housekeeper had seen in seconds. The next morning, Charles requested that Evelyn remain assigned to his suite. It startled the hospital administration. The director, who had nearly reprimanded her into silence, now shuffled papers nervously. trying to frame it as special patient preference. But everyone in the building knew what it meant. The billionaire had chosen to keep near him the woman who had saved his life, not because of her job title, but because of her courage. Michael protested furiously. "This is absurd, Father. You're giving her far too much credit. Do you know how dangerous it is to encourage staff like this? They'll think they can meddle in everything." His voice dripped with class prejudice, his entitlement exposed for all to see. But Charles, his strength slowly returning, fixed his son with a gaze that once made business rivals tremble. "Dangerous," he rasped. "What's dangerous, Michael, is arrogance that blinds us to truth. She saw what you didn't, what none of them did." Michael faltered, humiliated, but his father's tone left no room for argument. For once, silence was his only option. Over the days that followed, Charles's condition improved steadily. The more he regained strength, the more he asked about Evelyn. He asked her name, her story, where she came from. At first she answered reluctantly, always cautious of stepping too far beyond the invisible line society had drawn for her. But soon her natural dignity spilled through. She spoke of raising her son alone, of long hours scrubbing floors, of dreams once tucked away because the world had taught her to expect little. She spoke not with bitterness, but with the quiet resilience of someone who had endured much yet carried herself with grace. Charles listened intently, sometimes closing his eyes as if committing every word to memory. "Evelyn," he said one evening, his voice stronger now. "I built towers, companies, fortunes, but in all my years, I can't recall a single one of them being built on courage as pure as yours." The doctors tried to move on, but whispers circulated in their ranks. They spoke carefully of an unfortunate oversight, dressing their failure in sterile language. Yet the staff knew, the nurses knew, the security guards knew, and most importantly, the billionaire himself knew. The truth was unstoppable. 1 week later, as Charles prepared for discharge, the hospital arranged a press conference to reassure the public that the empire's figurehead would live. Cameras flashed, journalists leaned forward, pens scratched eagerly. The doctors lined up, prepared to bask in glory they had not earned. But to their astonishment, Charles requested Evelyn stand beside him. The director stammered. "Sir, perhaps it's better—" "No," Charles interrupted firmly. "She belongs here." The cameras turned, flashes exploding as Evelyn stepped forward uncertain, her housekeeping uniform a stark contrast to the immaculate suits around her. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Who was she? Why was she standing beside him? And then Charles spoke. "They say money buys the best," he began, his voice gravelly but steady. "They say with enough wealth, you can summon the world's brightest minds, the finest care, the strongest protections. And yet I nearly died. Not because I lacked doctors, but because too many assumed their eyes saw everything. It wasn't 20 specialists who saved me. It was a woman they never looked at. A woman tasked with cleaning my room, who refused to stay silent when she saw the truth.
Her name is Evelyn.
And I owe her my life." Gasps erupted, cameras clicked wildly. Evelyn froze, her heart pounding as the weight of his words sank in. The reporters leaned forward, eager, questions flying. What exactly did she do? Is this true? How could doctors miss it? The medical team shifted uncomfortably, their pride unraveling under the scrutiny of the press. But Charles's voice cut through. The world has long ignored voices like hers. Too often we dismiss the people who serve quietly, who labor in shadows, who carry wisdom that titles cannot measure. Today, I want the world to know I am alive because she dared to be heard. Evelyn felt tears sting her eyes. She had scrubbed floors in silence for decades, swallowed insults, endured invisibility, and now, standing under the glare of cameras, her truth stood tall for all to see. The aftermath was swift. Newspapers carried the story across the globe. Housekeeper saves billionaire's life. After doctors fail. Social media exploded with praise. Hashtags celebrating Evelyn's courage. Stories of other unseen workers being shared in solidarity. To some, she became a symbol, not of wealth or power, but of truth, of the dignity of labor, of the courage it takes to speak when silenced. For Evelyn, life did not change overnight. She still woke early, still tied her apron, still mopped and swept. But everywhere she went in the hospital, people looked differently at her now. Some with admiration, some with envy, some with resentment, but no longer with invisibility. Her very existence was undeniable. Charles, true to his word, did not forget. Weeks after leaving the hospital, he arranged for a scholarship fund in Evelyn's name. supporting the education of underprivileged, youth and honor she never sought, but could not refuse. And more privately, he called her often, asking not about his businesses, but about life, about her son, about her wisdom. Their bond was unlikely yet profound. As for Michael, he simmered in silence, his pride bruised. But even he could not erase what had happened. His father's empire now carried within it a story that money could never purchase. That of a black housekeeper who refused to be invisible. And Evelyn? She walked the halls of the hospital with her head a little higher, her step a little steadier. Not because of fame, not because of wealth, but because she had proven something to herself, that her voice mattered. That dignity could not be erased. That truth, once spoken, echoes louder than silence ever could. In the end, this was not just the story of a billionaire saved. It was the story of how one woman's courage exposed the fragility of pride, reminded the powerful of their limits, and declared to the world that even in the quietest corners, the unseen can hold the power of life itself. And for every housekeeper, every worker, every person overlooked by those who believe titles define worth, Evelyn's story whispered, "A promise, we see you. You matter. And one day, the world will too."